The blue and red lights painted the asphalt in harsh, alternating colors as Officer Daniel Martinez stepped out of his patrol car, hand resting on his belt with practiced authority. It was 9:47 p.m. on Highway 95, a stretch of road that cut through the heart of Riverside County like a concrete river. The air was thick with summer heat, even at this hour, and the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the rhythmic chirping of crickets in the tall grass along the shoulder. Martinez had pulled over a sleek black BMW, the kind of car that immediately caught his attention in this part of town. Behind the wheel sat a black man in his mid-30s, wearing what looked like an expensive navy suit and a crisp white shirt. Even from a distance, Martinez could see the man's hands placed calmly on the steering wheel, exactly where they should be. But that didn't matter to Martinez. In his 15 years on the force, he developed what he called instincts, though others might have called them something else entirely. License and registration. Martinez barked as he approached the driver's side window, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness to illuminate the interior of the car. The man inside didn't flinch, didn't show any signs of nervousness that Martinez had come to expect. Instead, he turned slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Good evening, officer," the man said, his voice calm and measured. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" Martinez felt his jaw tighten. He didn't like questions, especially not from people who looked like they thought they were better than him. The man's tone was too polite, too educated, too confident. It set Martinez's teeth on edge. "You were speeding." 47 in a 45 zone, Martinez lied smoothly, the fabrication rolling off his tongue like he'd practiced it 1,000 times. And, in a way, he had. License and registration. Now. The man in the BMW nodded slowly, reaching toward his glove compartment with careful, visible movements. "Of course, officer. I'll need to reach into my glove box for the registration." "Keep your hands where I can see them," Martinez snapped, though the man was already doing exactly that. As the driver retrieved his documents, Martinez's eyes swept over the car's interior. Leather seats, expensive electronics, a briefcase in the passenger seat that looked like it cost more than Martinez made in a month. Everything about this guy screamed money, privilege, the kind of person who thought rules didn't apply to them. The man handed over his license and registration through the window. Martinez snatched them without a word, his flashlight beam dancing across the documents. The license read, Marcus Williams, 34, with an address in an upscale part of the city that Martinez knew well. Too well. It was a kind of neighborhood where people called the police chief by his first name and donated to the mayor's campaign. "Step out of the vehicle," Martinez ordered, his voice taking on the hard edge he used when he wanted to establish dominance. Marcus looked up at him, his expression remaining calm despite the unreasonable request. "Officer, with respect, I don't believe I'm required to exit my vehicle for a simple traffic violation. I've provided my license and registration as requested." The words hit Martinez like a slap. This guy thought he knew the law better than a 15-year veteran? Thought he could quote procedures and regulations like some kind of lawyer? Martinez had dealt with his type before, educated, articulate, thinking they could talk their way out of anything with big words and legal mumbo-jumbo. "Don't tell me how to do my job," Martinez snarled, his hand moving instinctively closer to his service weapon. "I said step out of the vehicle. You can do it the easy way or the hard way." Marcus remained seated, his hands still visible on the steering wheel. "Officer, I'm simply exercising my constitutional rights. I'm cooperating fully, but I don't consent to any searches, and I don't see any legal justification for ordering me out of my vehicle." That was it. That was the line Martinez couldn't allow anyone to cross, especially not some uppity black guy in a fancy car who thought he could lecture a cop about the Constitution. Martinez's face flushed red, veins standing out on his neck as his temper flared. "Listen here, boy," Martinez said, the word dripping with venom that made its intended meaning crystal clear. "I've been doing this job since before you learned how to tie your shoes. Don't sit there in your stolen car talking to me about rights." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Stolen car. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, A flicker of recognition that this wasn't just about a traffic stop anymore. This was about something much deeper, much more dangerous. "The car isn't stolen, officer," Marcus said quietly. "It's registered in my name, as you can see from the documentation I provided." Martinez laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the empty highway. "Sure it is. And I suppose you're some kind of businessman, right? Let me guess, you're a doctor or maybe a lawyer." His voice was mocking, disbelieving. "I've seen this act before. Nice clothes, fancy car, trying to impress everyone with your vocabulary. But I know what you really are." "And what's that, officer?" Marcus asked, his voice still steady despite the escalating hostility. "A liar," Martinez spat. "A con man. Probably got that suit from some second-hand store and the car from some buy here, pay here lot. Acting like you're somebody important when we both know you're just another street thug playing dress up." The words cut through the night air like broken glass, each syllable designed to wound, to diminish, to reduce Marcus to nothing more than the stereotypes that lived in Martinez's head. But Marcus didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he sat there, absorbing the insults with a composure that only seemed to infuriate Martinez more. "I'm going to ask you one more time to step out of the vehicle," Martinez said, his hand now resting openly on his gun. "And if you don't comply, I'm going to drag you out and add resisting arrest to whatever other charges I decide to come up with." The threat was clear, unmistakable. This wasn't about traffic violations anymore. This was about power, about putting someone in their place, about reminding them who was really in charge on this stretch of highway. Martinez had played this game dozens of times before, and he'd never lost. The badge, the uniform, the gun, they were all the authority he needed. But Marcus Williams wasn't like the others Martinez had bullied into submission. As he sat there in the driver's seat, his mind was racing through calculations that Martinez couldn't possibly understand. Because Marcus Williams wasn't just another driver on Highway 95. He wasn't just another black man in an expensive car trying to avoid trouble with the police. Marcus Williams was FBI Special Agent Marcus Williams, and he was about to make a decision that would change both of their lives forever. But before we see how this routine traffic stop became a career-ending nightmare for Officer Martinez, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Stories like this expose the reality of prejudice and power, and what happens when someone finally has the authority to fight back. The next part of this story will blow your mind, so stick around to see what happened when Marcus finally revealed who he really was. Trust me, Martinez's reaction was priceless. Marcus Williams sat in the driver's seat of his BMW, feeling the weight of a decision that could derail months of careful undercover work. Through his rearview mirror, he could see Martinez pacing behind the patrol car, speaking rapidly into his radio. The officer's body language screamed aggression, shoulders tensed, one hand constantly moving to his weapon, the other gesturing wildly as he spoke to dispatch. Unit 47 requesting backup on Highway 95, mile marker 23. Martinez's voice carried clearly across the empty road. "I've got a suspicious individual, possible stolen vehicle. Subject is being non-compliant and argumentative." The lies flowed so easily from Martinez's mouth that Marcus almost admired the skill. Almost. In his 8 years with the Bureau, Marcus had encountered corrupt officers before, but rarely had he seen someone so blatantly fabricate a narrative in real time. Every word Martinez spoke into that radio was being recorded, every lie preserved for posterity. Marcus's phone, mounted on his dashboard, showed 17 missed calls from his partner, Agent Sarah Chun. She was probably watching his GPS location, wondering why he'd been stationary for so long. The operation they'd been running for 6 months, infiltrating a money laundering ring that stretched from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, required Marcus to maintain his cover as a wealthy businessman. Getting arrested by a racist cop wasn't part of the plan. Martinez finished his radio call and approached the car again, this time with his chest puffed out and his swagger more pronounced. He'd called for backup, which meant he felt emboldened, ready to escalate the situation even further. "All right, here's what's going to happen," Martinez announced, leaning down to peer through the driver's side window. "You're going to step out of this vehicle right now, or I'm going to assume you're armed and dangerous. And trust me, you don't want me to make that assumption. The threat was clear and illegal. Marcus knew that Martinez had no probable cause to order him out of the vehicle, no reasonable suspicion to justify a search, and certainly no grounds to assume he was armed. But Marcus also knew that none of that mattered to a cop who'd already decided how this encounter was going to end. "Officer Martinez," Marcus said, reading the name tag on the man's uniform, "I understand you're just doing your job, but I want to be clear that I do not consent to any searches of my person or my vehicle. I'm happy to cooperate within the bounds of the law, but—" "The bounds of the law," Martinez interrupted with a bitter laugh. "Let me tell you something about the law, college boy. The law is what I say it is out here on this highway. You think because you can string a few big words together, you know more than a 15-year veteran." Martinez's face was getting redder by the minute, his voice rising with each word. "I've dealt with hundreds of your kind, smooth talkers who think they can lawyer their way out of everything. But here's the thing, I don't care if you memorized every episode of Law and Order. When I tell you to do something, you do it." The phrase, "your kind," hung in the air like a neon sign. Marcus felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, the same rage he'd felt as a child when teachers assumed he couldn't read, when store clerks followed him through aisles, when college classmates questioned whether he'd earned his scholarship. But he'd learned long ago to channel that anger into focus, to use it as fuel rather than let it consume him. "I'm not trying to be difficult, officer," Marcus replied evenly. "I'm simply exercising the rights guaranteed to me by the Constitution you swore to uphold." That was apparently the wrong thing to say. Martinez's hand shot to his weapon, his fingers wrapping around the grip as his eyes narrowed to slits. "Don't you dare lecture me about the Constitution," Martinez hissed. "I've been protecting this community, while people like you were probably robbing convenience stores and dealing drugs on street corners. You want to talk about rights? Here's a right for you. I have the right to ensure my safety during this traffic stop." The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Martinez had just assumed, based on nothing but the color of Marcus's skin, that he was a criminal, drug dealer, convenience store robber. The stereotypes rolled off Martinez's tongue like he'd rehearsed them, each one designed to dehumanize, to justify whatever came next. Marcus's hands remained steady on the steering wheel, but his mind was racing. In the distance, he could see the flashing lights of an approaching patrol car. Martinez's backup was arriving. Once there were two officers on scene, the dynamic would shift dramatically. Marcus would be outnumbered, and if Martinez was willing to lie about the reason for the stop, what else would he be willing to fabricate? The backup cruiser pulled up behind Martinez's vehicle, and Marcus watched in his mirrors as a younger officer stepped out. This one looked barely old enough to shave, probably fresh out of the academy. Officer J. Rodriguez, according to his name tag, approached cautiously. "What's the situation, Danny?" Rodriguez asked, using Martinez's first name in a way that suggested they were familiar with each other. "Suspicious subject, possible stolen vehicle," Martinez replied, his voice loud enough for Marcus to hear clearly. "He's been argumentative, refusing to comply with lawful orders. I think he might be under the influence of something." Another lie, this one more dangerous than the others. Marcus hadn't consumed so much as a cup of coffee in the past 6 hours, but he knew that once Martinez planted the seed of suspected DUI, it would be nearly impossible to disprove on the side of the highway. Rodriguez peered through the passenger window, studying Marcus with curious eyes. "He doesn't look intoxicated to me," he said quietly. "Trust me, kid," Martinez replied, clapping Rodriguez on the shoulder. "I've been doing this a lot longer than you have. They're getting better at hiding it these days. Probably cocaine or meth, something that makes them think they're smarter than they are." Marcus felt his jaw clench. Martinez was now openly speculating about drug use, creating a fictional narrative that would justify whatever excessive force he was planning to use. And he was doing it in front of a younger officer, teaching him that this was how police work was supposed to be done. "Look, Officer Martinez," Marcus said, his voice still calm, but with an edge of steel that hadn't been there before. I'm going to be very clear with you. I have not been drinking. I have not been using drugs. I am not under the influence of any substance. I am a law-abiding citizen who was driving home from work when you pulled me over for allegedly going 2 miles per hour over the speed limit. Martinez's face twisted into a sneer. Law-abiding citizen? Is that what you call yourself? Then explain to me how someone like you affords a car like this. What do you do for work, exactly? The question was loaded with implication. In Martinez's worldview, there were only a few ways a black man could afford a luxury vehicle, and none of them were legitimate. Marcus could see the officer's mind working, probably cycling through possibilities. Drug dealer, pimp, thief, con artist. The idea that Marcus might have earned his money through education and hard work clearly never occurred to Martinez. I work in financial consulting, Marcus replied, which was technically true. His FBI cover identity involved working for a consulting firm that specialized in investigating financial crimes. I help businesses identify and prevent money laundering operations. Martinez burst out laughing, a harsh sound that echoed across the empty highway. Financial consulting? Money laundering. He turned to Rodriguez, shaking his head in apparent disbelief. You hear this guy, Rodriguez? He thinks we're idiots. Probably watches too many movies. I have business cards in my wallet if you'd like to see them, Marcus offered. Oh, I'm sure you do, Martinez replied mockingly. You can get those printed up at any Kinko's for $10. What's next? You going to tell me you're a federal agent? The irony of the statement wasn't lost on Marcus. Martinez had just unknowingly hit upon the exact truth he was trying so hard to deny. But Marcus couldn't reveal his real identity without compromising an ongoing federal investigation that had taken months to set up. His cover was too important, the operation too valuable. Or at least, that's what he told himself as Martinez's behavior grew increasingly erratic. Step out of the vehicle now, Martinez ordered, his hand moving to his weapon again. I'm not going to ask again. Officer, I need you to articulate your reasonable suspicion for ordering me out of the car, Marcus said, his FBI training kicking in. What specific, articulable facts lead you to believe I've committed a crime? The legal language seemed to infuriate Martinez even more. Reasonable suspicion? Articulable facts? Where the hell did you learn to talk like that? The same place I learned that the Fourth Amendment protects citizens from unreasonable searches and seizures, Marcus replied. The same place I learned that police officers are required to have probable cause before detaining someone. Martinez's face was now a deep shade of red, veins standing out on his forehead like road maps of rage. You think because you can recite some legal mumbo-jumbo, you're going to intimidate me? I've got news for you, pal. I don't care if you have the entire Constitution memorized. Out here, I am the law. The statement was so brazenly authoritarian that even Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. The younger officer shifted nervously, glancing between Marcus and Martinez, as if sensing that something was going very wrong. Danny, Rodriguez said quietly, maybe we should just write him a ticket and... Stay out of this, Rodriguez, Martinez snapped. This is about more than a traffic ticket. This is about respect. This is about people understanding their place in the order of things. Their place. The phrase sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He'd heard those words before in history books, in documentaries about the civil rights era. But hearing them spoken by a police officer in the 21st century felt like stepping through a time machine into America's darkest chapters. Marcus's phone buzzed with another call from Agent Chun. Through the windshield, he could see the lights of more vehicles approaching from both directions. Late-night travelers who would slow down to gawk at the traffic stop, their phones ready to record whatever happened next. In the age of social media, police encounters had a way of going viral, especially when they involved racial profiling and abuse of power. Martinez seemed oblivious to the growing audience. He was completely focused on Marcus, on proving whatever point he'd decided to make about authority and submission. The officer's hand hadn't left his weapon, and his breathing had become shallow and rapid, signs that Marcus recognized from his FBI training as precursors to violence. I'm going to count to 3, Martinez announced, his voice now barely controlled. "If you're not out of that car by the time I reach 3, I'm going to assume you're reaching for a weapon and act accordingly." The threat was unmistakable. Martinez was essentially announcing his intention to shoot an unarmed man for the crime of exercising his constitutional rights. Marcus felt his training warring with his instincts. Every fiber of his being wanted to comply, to de-escalate, to avoid giving Martinez any excuse to draw his weapon. But another part of him, the part that had sworn an oath to uphold justice, refused to submit to such blatant abuse of power. 1. Martinez began counting, his hand tightening on his service weapon. Marcus's mind raced through his options. He could comply, step out of the car, and likely face arrest on trumped-up charges. He could continue to resist and possibly face something much worse. Or he could do the one thing that would end this confrontation immediately, but potentially compromise months of federal investigation. 2. Martinez continued, now drawing his weapon halfway out of its holster. Rodriguez took a step back, his own hand moving to his radio. "Danny, I think you should calm down. There are people watching." Indeed, 3 cars had now slowed to a crawl as they passed the scene, their occupants holding up phones to record the encounter. Marcus could see the red recording lights blinking in the darkness like electronic fireflies. Martinez either didn't notice or didn't care about the audience. His world had narrowed to just himself and Marcus, predator and prey, authority and defiance. In his mind, this wasn't about traffic violations or reasonable suspicion anymore. This was about a black man who had dared to speak back to a white police officer, who had dared to know his rights, who had dared to act like he was equal. 3, Martinez said, and his weapon cleared leather. That's when Marcus Williams made the decision that would change both of their lives forever. Slowly, carefully, he reached for his wallet, his movements visible and deliberate. Martinez tensed, both hands now on his gun, ready to fire at the first sign of threat. But instead of a weapon, Marcus pulled out a leather credential case. And as he held it up to the window, the gold badge inside caught the red and blue lights of the patrol cars, reflecting them back like a mirror. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. The gold badge seemed to hover in the space between Marcus and Martinez like a talisman, its metallic surface catching the strobing patrol car lights and throwing them back in fragmented rainbows. For a moment that stretched into eternity, neither man moved. The highway around them had gone silent except for the distant hum of traffic and the electronic crackle of police radios. Martinez's service weapon trembled in his hands as his brain struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. The badge was real even from 3 feet away. He could make out the eagle, the scales of justice, the distinctive lettering that spelled out Federal Bureau of Investigation. It wasn't some novelty item from a costume shop or a prop from a movie set. It was the genuine article, complete with the holographic security features that were impossible to fake. That's not possible," Martinez whispered, his voice barely audible above the idling engines. His weapon remained trained on Marcus, but his grip had loosened slightly, uncertainty creeping into his stance. Marcus held the credential case steady, allowing both officers to see not just the badge, but the identification card beside it. Special Agent Marcus Williams, it read, along with his photograph and an official seal that matched the one on the badge. 8 years of service. Security clearance level, top secret. Assigned to the Los Angeles Field Office, Financial Crimes Division. Rodriguez stepped closer, squinting at the credentials in the flashing light. "Danny," he said quietly, I think that's real." "Shut up," Martinez snapped, but his voice lacked the authority it had carried just moments before. Sweat was now visible on his forehead despite the cool night air, and his hands shook almost imperceptibly as he struggled to maintain his grip on the weapon. Marcus spoke for the first time since revealing his identity, his voice carrying a new weight of authority that seemed to fill the space around them. "Officer Martinez, I'm going to need you to lower your weapon. You are currently pointing a firearm at a federal agent conducting official business." The words hit Martinez like physical blows. Federal agent. Official business. Every cop knew what those phrases meant, knew the mountain of paperwork and internal investigations that would follow if he'd just drawn down on an FBI agent. His career, his pension, his reputation, everything he'd built over 15 years on the force was suddenly hanging by a thread. But Martinez's mind was still reeling, still trying to reject what his eyes were telling him. "This is bullshit," he said, though his voice cracked on the words. "You're running some kind of scam. That badge is fake. Has to be." Marcus reached slowly into his jacket pocket, his movements deliberate and visible. "I'm retrieving my cell phone to call my field office for verification," he announced. "Agent Rodriguez, you can witness that I'm making no threatening moves." The formal tone, the use of Rodriguez's title, as if he were a colleague rather than a potential adversary. It all served to emphasize the shift in power dynamics. Marcus was no longer the suspect in this encounter. He was the federal agent, and Martinez was rapidly becoming the subject of investigation. Rodriguez nodded nervously. "I can see his hands," he confirmed, his voice tight with anxiety. The young officer was clearly beginning to understand the magnitude of what had just occurred. His training partner, his mentor, had just committed what might be the most spectacular career suicide in department history. Marcus's phone connected on the first ring. "Agent Chun," came the crisp voice from the speaker, loud enough for both officers to hear. "Chun, this is Williams," Marcus said, his eyes never leaving Martinez's face. "I need immediate verification of my identity and status. I'm currently dealing with a situation involving local law enforcement." "Marcus? Jesus, where have you been? I've been calling you for an hour. Your GPS showed you were stationary." And then, Chen's voice trailed off as she apparently realized this wasn't a social call. "What kind of situation?" "I'm being held at gunpoint by Officer Daniel Martinez. Badge number." Marcus paused, reading the numbers for Martinez's uniform. 4-7-7-9, Riverside County Sheriff's Department. "He's demanding verification of my credentials." The silence on the other end of the line lasted only a few seconds, but Marcus could practically hear the wheels turning in Chen's head. She was his partner, had been for 3 years. She knew exactly what this meant for their ongoing operation and for Marcus personally. "Patch me through to their dispatch," Chen said, her voice now carrying the cold efficiency that Marcus had seen her use with uncooperative suspects. "I'll verify your status through official channels." Martinez's weapon was now pointed at the ground, though he hadn't formally holstered it. His face had gone from red to pale, the color draining out of it like water from a broken dam. "This isn't happening," he muttered. "This can't be happening." Rodriguez had stepped back several paces, his own weapon now secured and his hands raised slightly in a gesture of non-aggression. The young officer's face showed a mixture of horror and fascination, like someone watching a car accident in slow motion. "Unit 47, this is dispatch," came a voice over Martinez's radio. "We have Agent Sarah Chun from the FBI on the line requesting verification of a traffic stop involving one of their agents. Can you confirm your status?" Martinez stared at his radio as if it were a venomous snake. Every cop knew that when the FBI called dispatch, it wasn't to chat about the weather. It meant something serious had happened, something that would generate reports and investigations and questions from people with badges that outranked everyone in the county. "Unit 47, please respond," dispatch repeated, the operator's voice taking on an edge of concern. Marcus watched Martinez struggle with the decision. The officer could continue to deny reality, could claim the credentials were fake and the phone call was some elaborate hoax. But doing so would only dig the hole deeper, would transform what might still be salvaged as a misunderstanding into an active obstruction of federal law enforcement. "This is Unit 47, Martinez finally said into his radio, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm currently in contact with an individual claiming to be FBI Agent Marcus Williams." "That's affirmative, Unit 47. Dispatch responded immediately. "Agent Williams is confirmed as active FBI personnel. Agent Chun is requesting immediate supervisor response to your location for coordination." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Supervisor response meant that Martinez's sergeant would be rolling to the scene, along with probably a lieutenant and possibly even the watch commander. Every rank above Martinez would be on that highway within 20 minutes. All of them wanting answers he didn't have. Marcus closed his phone and looked directly at Martinez. "Officer, I'm going to need you to holster your weapon and step back from my vehicle." It wasn't a request. The tone, the authority, the complete reversal of roles. Martinez found himself complying almost automatically. His training kicked in, the muscle memory of taking orders from federal agents during joint task force operations. The weapon slid into its holster with a soft click that seemed to echo across the highway. "Agent Williams," Rodriguez said tentatively, "I want you to know that I didn't agree with how this stop was being conducted. I was going to recommend that we just issue a citation and—" "I appreciate that, Officer Rodriguez," Marcus replied, cutting off what was clearly going to be an attempt to distance himself from Martinez's actions. "Everything that happened here tonight was recorded by your dash cameras, correct?" Rodriguez nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. Both vehicles have active recording systems." Marcus smiled for the first time since the stop began, but it wasn't a friendly expression. It was the smile of a predator who had just realized his prey was trapped. "Good. That will make the investigation much simpler." Martinez finally seemed to snap back to awareness, the implications of Marcus's words hitting him like a physical blow. "Investigation? What investigation?" "Look, Agent Williams, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. I was just doing my job, following standard procedures." "Standard procedures?" Marcus interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. "Is it standard procedure to pull someone over for going 2 miles per hour over the speed limit? Is it standard procedure to order a compliant driver out of his vehicle without probable cause? Is it standard procedure to assume a black man in a nice car must be a criminal?" Each question landed like a hammer blow, and Marcus could see Martinez flinching with each one. The officer's face had gone from pale to gray, the color of someone who was beginning to understand the true scope of his predicament. "I never said anything about race," Martinez protested weakly. "This wasn't about—" "You called me boy," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "You said people like me don't belong in cars like this. You assumed I was a drug dealer, a thief, a con man. You told me I needed to understand my place in the order of things. Should I continue?" Rodriguez was now backing away from Martinez, as if the man were radioactive. The young officer's face showed dawning horror as he realized he'd been witness to what could only be described as a textbook case of racial profiling and abuse of power. The sound of approaching sirens began to fill the night air, multiple vehicles, coming from both directions. Marcus counted at least 3 distinct tones, probably more units, than had ever responded to a simple traffic stop in this part of the county. Word was clearly spreading through the department that something extraordinary was happening on Highway 95. "Agent Williams," Martinez said, desperation creeping into his voice, "I want you to know that I have nothing against. I mean, some of my best friends are. Look, can we work this out? Maybe I came on a little strong, but—" "Officer Martinez," Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying the cold authority of 8 years of federal law enforcement experience. "You drew your weapon on a federal agent. You threatened to shoot me for exercising my constitutional rights. You engaged in what appears to be systematic racial profiling and abuse of power. There is no working this out." The first supervisor vehicle arrived with a spray of gravel and flashing lights. Sergeant Patricia Hayes stepped out, a 20-year veteran whose reputation for handling difficult situations was legendary in the department. She took one look at the scene, Marcus standing beside his BMW with his credentials visible, Martinez pale and shaking, Rodriguez backing away from his partner like he was toxic waste, and immediately understood that this was going to be the kind of incident that generated newspaper headlines and internal affairs investigations. "What in the hell is going on here?" Hayes demanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd broken up more fights and sorted out more disasters than she cared to count. Marcus held up his credentials. "Sergeant Hayes, I'm Special Agent Marcus Williams, FBI. Your officer drew his weapon on me during what started as a routine traffic stop. I need to speak with your watch commander immediately." Hayes examined the credentials, her experienced eyes noting the security features and official seals that marked them as genuine. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and finally resignation as she realized what this meant for her department and her officer. "Martinez," she said, her voice now carrying a tone that Marcus recognized as the calm before the storm, "please tell me you didn't do what the agent is saying you did." Martinez opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He stood there like a fish gasping for air, his career drowning in the silence that stretched between them. In the distance, more sirens were approaching. Word had clearly reached the upper echelons of the sheriff's department, and everyone with bars on their collar was rolling to the scene. Marcus knew that within the hour, this stretch of highway would be swarming with commanders, investigators, and probably reporters who monitored police scanners for exactly this kind of story. But for now, in this moment, it was just Marcus and Martinez facing each other across a divide that had suddenly reversed itself. The man who had started the evening with absolute power now stood powerless, his authority stripped away by the simple revelation of who his victim really was. And Marcus Williams, FBI Special Agent Marcus Williams, was just getting started. The moment Martinez realized he'd just threatened to shoot a federal agent was absolutely priceless. But trust me, this story gets even more incredible. If you're enjoying watching this racist cop's world completely fall apart, make sure you smash that like button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever seen someone's prejudice backfire this spectacularly? Because what happens next will show you exactly why you should never judge someone by the color of their skin. Martinez's career was about to become a cautionary tale that would be told in police academies for years to come. Within 30 minutes, Highway 95 looked like a law enforcement convention. 7 patrol cars, 2 supervisor vehicles, an FBI response team, and a crime scene unit had transformed the quiet stretch of road into a carnival of flashing lights. Marcus counted at least 15 officers milling around, most of them stealing glances at Martinez, who sat in the back of Sergeant Hayes' patrol car looking like a man attending his own funeral. Watch Commander Lieutenant Robert Kane stepped out of his vehicle with the measured pace of someone who'd been dealing with crisis management for the better part of 2 decades. His uniform was immaculate despite being called out at nearly midnight, and his expression carried the weary resignation of a man who knew he was about to spend the next several months in disciplinary hearings. "Agent Williams," Kane said, extending his hand with professional courtesy. "I'm Lieutenant Kane. I want to apologize on behalf of the department for whatever occurred here tonight." Marcus shook the offered hand, but didn't return the conciliatory tone. "Lieutenant, your officer drew his weapon on a federal agent conducting official business. He engaged in what appears to be racial profiling and threatened to shoot me for asserting my constitutional rights. An apology isn't going to cover this." Kane's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I understand your concern, Agent Williams. We take these matters very seriously. Officer Martinez will be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation." "Administrative leave?" Marcus's voice carried a sharp edge. "Lieutenant, if I had drawn my weapon on one of your officers, would I be getting administrative leave?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Kane's eyes flicked toward the assembled crowd of officers, many of whom were now openly listening to the conversation. The politics of the situation were delicate. He needed to show appropriate concern for Marcus's complaint while not completely throwing one of his officers under the bus in front of the entire shift. Agent Chen's arrival cut through the tension like a knife. Marcus's partner stepped out of a black SUV, her FBI windbreaker visible in the strobing lights. She surveyed the scene with the calculating gaze of someone trained to read crime scenes and political situations with equal skill. "Marcus," she said, approaching with quick, efficient steps. "Are you injured?" "I'm fine," Marcus replied. "But we need to discuss how this affects the operation." Chen's expression darkened. Their money laundering investigation had taken 6 months to set up, involved multiple federal agencies, and was scheduled to culminate in arrests within the next 2 weeks. Marcus's cover as a wealthy financial consultant was now completely blown, along with months of careful preparation. How many people recorded this? Chun asked, gesturing toward the small crowd of civilian vehicles that had gathered at a safe distance. The red recording lights of cell phones were visible in several cars, creating an electronic constellation of evidence. Rodriguez stepped forward nervously. "Ma'am, I think at least 3 or 4 vehicles stopped during the incident. And our dash cams were recording the entire time." Chun closed her eyes briefly, probably calculating the nightmare of media attention that was about to descend on everyone involved. "Lieutenant Kane, we're going to need copies of all recordings related to this incident. And we'll need a complete list of everyone who was present during the stop." "Of course," Kane replied quickly. "Whatever you need for your investigation." "Our investigation?" Chen's eyebrows rose. "Lieutenant, I think you misunderstand. This isn't our investigation anymore. This is going to be handled by the FBI's Civil Rights Division, the Department of Justice, and probably Internal Affairs from 3 different agencies. My partner was the victim of a federal crime." The weight of Chen's words seemed to physically impact Kane. His shoulders sagged slightly as he realized that this wasn't going to be a matter handled quietly within the department. This was going to be a federal case, with federal prosecutors and federal oversight. The kind of case that ended careers and generated headlines. Martinez remained in the patrol car, his head in his hands. Through the window, Marcus could see the man's shoulders shaking slightly. Whether from anger, fear, or the crushing realization of what he'd done, Marcus couldn't tell and didn't particularly care. Officer Rodriguez approached hesitantly. "Agent Williams, I want you to know that I tried to de-escalate the situation. I never agreed with how Officer Martinez was handling the stop." Marcus studied the young officer's face. Rodriguez looked genuinely distressed, his rookie idealism clearly shaken by witnessing his training officer's spectacular fall from grace. "Officer Rodriguez," Marcus said carefully, "you'll have an opportunity to provide your statement to the investigating agents. I'd suggest you be completely honest about everything you witnessed tonight." Rodriguez nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir." The crowd of officers began to disperse as supervisors started coordinating the investigation process. Crime scene photographers were documenting everything. Investigators were interviewing witnesses, and someone from the department's media relations unit had arrived to prepare for what was clearly going to be a public relations disaster. Chun pulled Marcus aside, lowering her voice. "We need to discuss extraction. Your cover is completely blown, and every criminal organization in the city is going to know by morning that Marcus Williams, the financial consultant, is actually Marcus Williams, the FBI agent." Marcus nodded grimly. 6 months of work, dozens of carefully cultivated contacts, an entire operation designed to take down a money laundering network that moved millions of dollars through legitimate businesses. All of it was now compromised because a racist cop couldn't handle seeing a black man in a nice car. "The subjects we've been tracking?" Marcus asked. "We'll have to move up the timeline," Chun replied. "Arrest warrants, asset seizures, the whole thing. We'll get maybe 48 hours before word spreads through their network that our inside man was federal law enforcement." Lieutenant Kane approached them again, his expression showing the strain of managing a crisis that was spiraling beyond his control. "Agent Williams, Agent Chun, I want to assure you that Officer Martinez will face the full consequences of his actions. The department does not tolerate this kind of behavior." Chen's laugh was bitter. "Lieutenant, with all due respect, your department just tolerated 15 years of this kind of behavior. Officer Martinez didn't develop these attitudes overnight, and I seriously doubt this was his first incident of racial profiling." Kane's face flushed slightly. "I understand your frustration, but do you?" Marcus interrupted. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like your department's idea of consequences is administrative leave and sensitivity training. Meanwhile, months of federal investigation work is down the drain because one of your officers thinks his badge gives him the right to terrorize black citizens." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a news van. its satellite dish extending into the night sky like a mechanical flower blooming toward the stars. Then another van. Then a third. Someone had been monitoring police scanners, and word was spreading through the media that something significant was happening on Highway 95. Kane looked at the approaching media with the expression of a man watching his own execution. Agent Williams, perhaps we could discuss moving this conversation to a more private location? Marcus looked at the gathering crowd of reporters, their cameras already focusing on the scene. His FBI training told him to avoid media attention, to keep the investigation quiet and controlled. But another part of him, the part that had been called boy and threatened with death for exercising his rights, wanted the whole world to see what had happened on this stretch of highway. No, Lieutenant, Marcus said firmly. I think the public has a right to know exactly what kind of policing is happening in their community. And as the first reporter approached with a microphone and a cameraman in tow, Marcus Williams made his second decision of the night that would change everything. He was going to tell his story. All of it. The first news report aired at 6 a.m., just as the morning commute was beginning. Channel 7's lead story opened with dashcam footage that the Sheriff's Department had been forced to release under public records laws. The video was grainy, shot in the harsh glare of patrol car headlights, but the audio was crystal clear. You're lying about being a federal agent, Martinez's voice echoed through television speakers across the county. Then came the moment that would be replayed thousands of times. Marcus calmly presenting his FBI credentials as Martinez stood frozen, his weapon still partially drawn. By 8 a.m., the hashtag #BadgeTruth was trending nationally. The story had everything social media algorithms craved. Clear heroes and villains, institutional racism exposed, and a satisfying reversal of power. Marcus's calm professionalism in the face of Martinez's aggression made the contrast even more striking. Martinez himself became a living cautionary tale. Within 72 hours, he was terminated from the Sheriff's Department, stripped of his pension, and facing federal civil rights charges. The man who had spent 15 years building his authority through fear and intimidation was now the subject of a Department of Justice investigation. But the real impact went far beyond one racist cop's downfall. The incident sparked a broader conversation about racial profiling in law enforcement. Police academies began using the dashcam footage as training material, showing recruits exactly what not to do during traffic stops. The clear documentation of Martinez's escalating behavior became a textbook example of how implicit bias could destroy careers and violate citizens' rights. Marcus Williams found himself reluctantly thrust into the spotlight as a symbol of dignity under pressure. He testified before Congress about racial profiling, spoke at police training conferences, and became a voice for reform within law enforcement. But he never let the attention go to his head. I didn't set out to become anyone's hero that night, Marcus told a reporter 6 months later. I was just a federal agent trying to do my job who happened to encounter a police officer who couldn't see past the color of my skin. The real heroes are the people who face this kind of treatment every day without a badge to protect them. The money laundering operation Marcus had been investigating was salvaged, though the timeline had to be accelerated. The arrests made headlines, but they were overshadowed by the larger story of systemic reform his encounter with Martinez had triggered. Officer Rodriguez, the young cop who had witnessed the entire incident, became an advocate for police reform within his own department. He eventually left law enforcement to become a civil rights attorney, citing that night on Highway 95 as the moment he realized the system needed to be changed from the outside. Lieutenant Kane implemented new training protocols and civilian oversight measures, turning his department into a model for community policing. The incident that could have destroyed his career instead became the catalyst for meaningful reform. And Martinez? He served 18 months in federal prison for violating Marcus's civil rights. Upon his release, he worked construction jobs and tried to rebuild his life away from law enforcement. He never spoke publicly about that night on Highway 95, but those who knew him said it had fundamentally changed him, stripped away the arrogance, and forced him to confront who he really was when the badge came off. The intersection where it all happened was eventually renamed Williams Way, though Marcus protested the honor. "It shouldn't be named after me," he said at the dedication ceremony. "It should be named for every person who's been pulled over for driving while black, for everyone who's been judged by their appearance instead of their character." 3 years later, Marcus Williams was promoted to supervisory special agent and put in charge of the FBI's new Civil Rights Enforcement Unit. His first case involved investigating a police department in a small Texas town where officers had been caught on camera using excessive force during traffic stops. The cycle continued, but now there was someone in a position of power who understood exactly what it felt like to be on the other side of that blue wall. Marcus Williams turned a moment of racial profiling into a catalyst for nationwide police reform. His calm response and professional handling of Martinez's aggression didn't just protect his own rights. It opened a window into the daily reality that many Americans face during police encounters. But here's what I find most powerful about this story. Marcus could have stayed silent, could have used his federal authority to make the problem disappear quietly. Instead, he chose to go public, to let the world see what happened on that highway. That decision sparked conversations in police departments, courtrooms, and living rooms across America. What's your take on this story? Do you think one viral moment can really change how an entire system operates? Or does it take sustained pressure over time? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your perspectives always add new dimensions to these stories that I never considered. If stories about justice, accountability, and people standing up for what's right are your thing, you'll want to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We dive deep into cases like this every week, showing how ordinary moments can expose extraordinary truths about power, prejudice, and the ongoing fight for civil rights in America. Next week, we're covering the case of the prosecutor who thought she could intimidate a public defender, until she discovered that public defender was actually an undercover federal judge conducting a corruption investigation. Trust me, the look on her face when the truth came out was absolutely priceless. Until then, remember what Marcus Williams proved that night on Highway 95. Sometimes the most powerful response to hatred isn't anger or violence. It's simply refusing to be intimidated by people who think their authority makes them untouchable. The badge doesn't make the person. The person makes the badge mean something. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.